this coming Psalm 83 war, because some say that some of these nations in the Psalm 83 war are going to be so devastated that they won't even be around to participate in Gog-Magog. Explain that.
Absolutely, and I do want to explain that about their apparent omission by Ezekiel in his description of the Gog of Magog war. But let's talk briefly about Psalm 83 in a nutshell. Asaph, who wrote the psalm, we are told was not only a psalmist but a prophet in the book of 2 Chronicles. He wrote 12 psalms, and among the 12 psalms, Psalm 83 is the most prophetic that he wrote. He wrote 3,000 years ago at a time when Israel was in a condition of peace. I mean, they had their King David. I mean, ultimately they did have some wars, but not when he was writing this psalm. And so they were talking about building their temple, their rain was falling in due season, etc. And he writes this psalm that talks about and pretty much a genocidal attempt of his people. And what he says is there's going to come together a Arab confederacy. They're going to plot to destroy the nation of Israel, that the name of Israel can be remembered no more. They're going to have a crafty, devious plan it talks about. He identifies who they are, and they're the Arab states that share common borders with Israel, and the Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Iraq is included in his list. And, of course, now we realize that those are the countries that came against Israel in 1948, which is a good point. You can't destroy a nation, which is what the psalm calls for, the nation of Israel, that it can be remembered no more unless there is an Israel. And that Israel came into existence in 1948, and so did the Psalm 83 countries come against Israel. And when they failed, they've had subsequent wars in 67 and 73. And when they failed, the Israeli Defense Forces started to burgeon into a strength, and that is also in Bible prophecy. That's how Israel becomes, as the subtitle, the next Mideast superpower. The Israeli Defense Forces exist in the Bible, and that's when the Arabs decided a parallel track with conventional wars against Israel, and that was terrorism and propaganda. Now, terrorism, of course, that's when the Hamas come and burgeon in, and other terrorist groups, and Hamas are fighting an unconventional war with Israel by continuing to lob rockets in there. And the propaganda now is going through the United Nations. And to be quite honest with you, Jan, America is actually doing the bidding of Psalm 83 by trying to give Israel to give up land to the Arabs. That's the very goal of Psalm 83. In verse 12, Psalm 83, verse 12, it says that they can have the pastures of God for themselves as a possession. So in a summary, Jan, what you got is a psalm written 3,000 years ago, appears to be for our time, dealing with the climactic concluding Arab-Israeli war, where they want to destroy the nation of Israel. They want to take over the promised land, and if it is for our time, it means they don't want peace with the Jews. They want peace without the Jews. Right. They don't want a two-state solution. They want one more Arab state, and they want to call it Palestine.